Hello students, welcome to history lecture. Today we are going to learn history chapter number 1, that is sources of history. Before we start the lesson, it is necessary to understand the importance of history. Why do we need to study history? What are the benefits of studying history? Students, the study of history is important because history allows us to understand our past, which in turn allows us to understand our present. If we want to know how and why our world is the way it is today, we have to look to history for the answers. Studying history also makes us aware about the culture with which we are less familiar. Thus, history helps us to understand our culture, it helps us to understand our own society, it builds citizenship. History builds interpretation and analysis skills. Studying history helps us to understand the history and evolution of ideas. In this way, it helps you understand the practical consequences for particular ideologies and world views. Students, last year in Standard 6th, you have studied about ancient Indian history, and you have also studied that our Indian history is divided into three periods, that is ancient period, medieval period and modern period. So this year in standard 7th you are going to learn about medieval Indian history, that is the period from 9th century CE till the end of 18th century CE. Students, what does the term CE stands for in history? Let us understand the concept of CE with the help of timeline. Chronology is very important in the study of history. Chronology means putting things in the right order according to the event taken place. That is why dates are so important in the study of history. The most commonly used system of dating things in history is the one which we use every day, that is based on the Gregorian calendar. Under the Gregorian calendar, the year is divided into 365 days or 366 days in a leap year. The years are numbered according to the year in which Lord Jesus Christ was believed to have been born. The period before the birth of Christ is known as BC, that is before Christ, and also known as BCE, that is before Common Era. And years after the birth of Christ are known as AD, that is Anno Domini, or also known as CE, that is Common Era. So, 0 on the timeline indicates birth of Jesus Christ, and all the dates to the right of timeline indicates AD dates, that is Anno Domini, or also known as Common Era, and all the dates to the left are BC dates, that is before Christ, or also known as before Common Era. Common Era is a method used to identify a year. It means a year in today's period in our time. It is a system for recording dates used almost everywhere around the world today. Thus, we can say that this year is 2020 CE, which describes the current year. Students, medieval period witnesses certain development that differentiate it from the ancient period about which we are going to study in Standard 7th History. So let's start with our first lesson, that is sources of history. History is the study of the past events. It gives us chronological, scientific and systematic account of past events. Students, chronological means events arranged in an order in which they have taken place. To understand the events more systematically, history is written in a chronological order. And these events are based on authentic proof or evidence. Authentic means real proof, true evidence. These proofs are known as sources of history. Historical sources are original sources that provide us important historical information. These sources are the medium, they are the way or things that inform us about the past events. These sources have to be verified. It is necessary to use these sources only after a critical examination. Students, the person who studies the history and all the past events happened and also brings it to the conclusion after critical analysis, he is known as historian. The works of contemporary Western historians like Robert Arm, M.C. Sprengel and Grant Duff are also important. Students, if you remember, last year we have studied about the 4 major pillars of history, without which we cannot write history. So, which are the 4 factors important from the viewpoint of history? 4 factors are very important from the viewpoint of history. They are individual, society, place, time. Students, study of history is based on these 4 factors. Events occurred in past are related to some individuals based on society and also when and where the events have taken place. Means individual, society, place, time. Take an example of ancient Indian history which you have studied last year in Standard 6th. How these 4 factors helped you while studying ancient history? As ancient Indian history describes the beginning of human civilization, means we have studied about many dynasties which were ruled by different kings. Means we have studied the study of individual, their culture, economic and political condition, means study of society. When and where the events have taken place means the study of place and time. So these 4 factors are important from the viewpoint of history. As we have studied the classification of history, history is classified into 3 sources. So do you remember what are the 3 sources of history? Sources of history of medieval period are classified into material source, written source and oral source. Students, these are some examples of material sources of the medieval period of Indian history. Forts, memorials, buildings, cave sculptures, inscriptions, coins, copper plates. Among these material sources, forts have an important place in medieval Indian history. Some major types of forts are hill forts, forest forts, sea forts, and forts on the plains. Students, if you remember in Standard 4th, you have studied about medieval Indian history, about Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj son of Shahaji Raje and Veer Mata Jijabai, was the founder of the Maratha Empire in the Indian subcontinent. At the beginning of 17th century CE, most of the territories in Maharashtra were under the control of Mughals. It was necessary to curb their cruel activities, and thus Shivaji Maharaj decided to establish Swaraj. Why forts were of special significance during medieval period? What was the reason Shivaji Maharaj decided to acquire the forts? In medieval Indian history, forts were of special significance because with a firm hold over a fort, it was possible to control the surrounding area. If one had forts, one ruled the land. Therefore, Shivaji Maharaj decided to acquire the forts that were within his own Jagir. Next material source is monuments. Monuments also have an important place among material sources. Monuments of medieval Indian history includes samadhis, graves, veergala, etc. Through these monuments, we come to know about the development of architecture during the medieval period and also economic conditions and people's standard of living in that particular period. How do coins narrate history? As you have studied, in ancient period, the Kushana kings were the first kings to start minting gold coins in India. Gold and copper coins were minted by Emperor Kanishka. Similarly, coins were also used in medieval period. Students, coins also give much and more information about medieval Indian history. The coins were made by different rulers using metals like gold, silver, copper. From these coins, we learn about the rulers, their period, their governance, and religious ideas. Students, see this image of coins of medieval Indian history. From these images of Ram Sita on the coins of Emperor Akbar or Shiv Parvati on the coins of Hyder Ali, we see the religious coordination of those days. The Peshwas used the Arabic and Persian language on their coins. This throws light on the use of language in that particular period. Next material source is inscription. Students, an inscription is considered to be a very important and reliable source of history. It helps us to understand features like language, script, social life of particular period. See the image of Brihadishwara temple, which is situated in Tanjavur. Many inscriptions of the period of Chalukya, Rashtrakuta, Chola and Yadav kings are found here. Even inscriptions were carved on sheets of copper, which were known as copper plates. Students, see this image of copper plates. The kings have inscriptions carved on copper plates and temple walls as a sign of their power and wisdom. When a king lives or dies, their power and knowledge is carved in the memory of the people in the kingdom through these inscriptions. These are some more material source of medieval Indian history: temples, church, mosque, agyaris, gurudwara, ornaments, toys, implements, musical instruments, chaityas, viharas, etc. A chaitya is a Buddhist or Jain shrine including a stupa. In modern text on Indian architecture, the term Chaitya Griha is often used to denote an assembly or prayer hall. Vihara was early type of Buddhist monastery consisting of an open court surrounded by open cell accessible through an entrance porch. The viharas in India were originally constructed to shelter the monks during the rainy season when it became difficult for them to lead the wanderer's life. These are some weapons used for warfare in the campaigns during the medieval period. Coat of mail, helmet, dandapatta, sword, wagner, bichwa, cannonballs, etc. These are some utensils used in medieval times. In ancient period, mud vessels were used on a large scale, but after when metals were discovered, people started using copper vessels, brass vessels. In medieval period, common people used mud vessels, copper vessels and brass vessels, and kings and royal people used silver and gold vessels. Students, now we are going to learn about written sources of medieval Indian history. A written source or a written document cannot be said to be authentic just because it is old. It needs to be examined critically as to who wrote it, why it was written, and when was it written. So, let us see the written sources of medieval period. Documents of proceedings in the courts of kings, treaties, biographies, correspondence, travelogues, chronicles, tawarik, etc. We learn about significant historical events in the medieval period from sources like the writing styles of scripts like Devanagari, Arabic, Persian, Modi, etc., as also from the varieties of different languages, Bhurjapatras, religious manuscripts, treaties, edicts, decrees, biographies, paintings, etc. We can gather information about the food items, attire, conventions, and rules of conduct of the people, festivals, and about people's life, etc. from these sources. Sources of this type are called written sources of history. During medieval period, some travelers who visited India had written about their experience of traveling in the book which is known as travelogue. They experienced Indian culture, even they noticed how an Indian ruler used to rule his kingdom. All these experiences travelers used to write in travelogue, which is one of the written source of medieval period. Some of the travelers who wrote travelogue are Al-Biruni, Ibn Battuta, Nicolau Manucci. Similarly, Babur's biography is also one of the written source of medieval India. Babur was the founder of Mughal Empire and the first emperor of the Mughal dynasty in the Indian subcontinent. Students, this is the image of Sri Shiv Bharat, also known as the Sanskrit biography of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, which was composed by the poet Parmanand. In this book, poet Parmanand has mentioned about the early life and events of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. It is also considered by most scholars as an authentic material source for the historical study. Next written source is Tariq, also known as Tawarik, which means the sequence of events. Students, as we have studied that history is always written in chronological order, that is according to the sequence of the events that had taken place in past. Thus, Tawarik or Tariq helps us to understand history in chronological order. Here are some Tawariks which are written by Al-Biruni, Ziauddin Barani, Maulana Ahmad, Mirza Haider, Bhimsen Saxena. Genealogy means the study of family history, including who the ancestors of a person were. It is an account of person or family from an ancestor's forms. In short, genealogy means a study of family ancestral lines. Next written source is Bakhar. Bakhar is a type of chronicle that was originated in Maharashtra. Chronicles help in understanding aspects like contemporary political happenings, linguistic transactions, cultural life, social conditions of medieval Indian history. Next, we will learn about oral sources of medieval Indian history. Folk songs, gatha, shloks, abhangs, povadas, proverbs, legends, and myths. These sources are traditionally passed on from generation to generation by word of mouth. This literature is not found in the written form. Its authors are unknown. This type of literature is preserved by oral tradition, forms the oral sources of history. Folk literature, gatha, shloks, abhangs are some oral sources which are based on inspirational songs sung by great saints of medieval period in the form of poetry, bhajans, kirtans. Some medieval saints like Sant Ramdas, Sant Jnaneshwar, Sant Namdev, Sant Eknath, Sant Tukaram had worked for the betterment of the society through these oral sources. Similarly, povadas are a kind of ballads or poetry which narrate the various historical events and great deeds of heroic or brave people in a very inspiring way. Students, this is the information related to the Povada of Tanaji, which is composed by Tulsidas Shahir. In his Povada, he has described about the Kondana camping which was led by Tanaji Malusare. Tanaji Malusare was a Subedar in the army of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. He is remembered for the Battle of Kondana, where he fought against the Mughals until his last breath. Preparations were going on for the marriage of Tanaji's son Raiba. Tanaji went to invite Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and his family to attend the wedding, but he came to know that Shivaji Maharaj wanted to get the Kondana fort back from the Mughals. After listening this, Tanaji said Raiba's wedding can wait. First, he decided to capture the Kondana fort. The battle was fought fiercely, but Tanaji was killed. His uncle Shelar Mama took command of the battle after Tanaji's death and defeated Mughals. Shivaji Maharaj used to call Tanaji Sinha, which means lion. Thus, in the honor of Tanaji, Shivaji Maharaj changed the name of Kondana Fort to Sinhagad Fort. All these events are described in this Povada. The Povada contains beautiful character sketches of Shelar Mama, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, Tanaji, Veer Mata Jijabai. Students, do this activity. Collect the Povadas or tribal songs and You can present them in the cultural program arranged in our school. Students, as we have studied the importance of source in history, we should also learn why it is important to evaluate or examine the sources of history. Before using these sources of history in the study of history, it is very much necessary to examine the authenticity of the sources, whether they are genuine or fake. The conclusions drawn on the basis of various genuine documents have to be cross checked. Such a critical analysis is very important in writing of history. So, the author's impartiality and neutrality are very important in writing history. Students, as evaluating the sources of history is important, similarly, preserving the sources of history is also important. Here are some measures for preserving sources of history. By keeping the historical sources in the museums and archives, by not destroying the historical monuments and historical sources. The monuments and other historical buildings should be given protection by hiring security guards. Citizens should prevent themselves and others from writing on the walls. We must prevent ourselves and others from scribbling on the walls of historical monuments. Preserving these historical sources is important, through which the rich tradition of Indian history can be handed over to the next generation. Students, in today's lecture, we studied sources of history, importance of evaluating the sources of history, and importance of preserving the sources of history. In next lecture, we will learn about India before the times of Shivaji Maharaj and various ruling powers existed in India during the medieval period. Thank you.